The Duke and Duchess of York oftentimes make the headlines for the exact wrong reasons. And we do have a new book discussing not only sort of their relationship dynamic and what went on during the early years of their marriage, but really details sort of a lot of the financial impropriety and a lot of the scandals surrounding Andrew and Sarah as well. And you can't help but see some echoes of Harry and Meghan in there. So I had a wonderful opportunity to interview Andrew Lownie about his book entitled Discussing the Fall of the House of York. So we are going to get into that because it was a fantastic conversation. We got to talk about not only what happened in the past, but what does this mean for the future of the monarchy and sort of the monarchies around Europe? These are great conversations to have. So, guys, I'm so excited. Let's get into it. But if you guys haven't subscribed to Royal News Network before, please hit that subscribe button. I would absolutely love to have you back. I talk about royals and offer some compelling and unique commentary. So this is going to be a great conversation. We did have a couple of technical glitches. Hopefully I was able to clean them up fairly well, guys, but I'm so excited for this conversation. So let's go ahead and get into it. Andrew, thank you so much for taking some time to share more about what you learned about the Yorks in your latest book. So I just wanted to start off with sort of a kind of an overall question is, what inspired you to investigate the House of York? And obviously, there's been other books written about this topic, but why now is it so important?
Well, it's the third of a trilogy on royal marriages. The first was on the Mountbattens and their open marriage. Second was on the greatest love story of the 20th century, or was it, the Duke of Windsor. And this is on prisms to look at the marriage, to look at the two of them together. But also, it was to look at, clearly, Andrew being in the news a lot because of Epstein. There hasn't actually been anything much written on them in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, a lot of journalism, but no proper biography. It's the first joint biography, and it's, I would argue, the first in-depth biography of either that's not written with their cooperation. I felt that there was an important story here also about the relationship between the press and the royal household, the way that the news management is managed. And I felt there was also a very strong story here about financial corruption, frankly, at the heart of the royal family. This was a senior royal. And no one had really looked properly at the way that these two figures had leveraged their royal status for their own private financial gain.
Yes, I found that really fascinating throughout the book is to learn more about how he was using these connections, using his role as a special envoy, really to enrich himself and set up these commissions. And Sarah does the same thing. And so, I mean, I think the big question is in some ways is because we see a little bit of this now as well. Is this a lesson the royal family has learned, or are they allowing some of the mistakes of the past to repeat?
Well, their line is this is all news, which it isn't all news. I mean, there's a lot of new material there. I mean, clearly there are some material, stories that I had to look into, which have already appeared in the media. But I talked to 300 people, most of whom hadn't spoken before. And these are, very close associates, former members of staff, school friends, naval colleagues, people who work with them in charities, journalists who's had their stories spiked. So it is an area that hasn't really been properly looked at, and I hope the royal family or the household will reconsider how they do news management now. I mean, I think they have to be slightly more open. I mean, there's been a little bit of a sort of, I think people have been scared to speak out. We saw how Amy Robach at ABC was prevented from writing about Andrew and Virginia Giuffre years ago, when the palace put pressure on ABC saying, if you run this piece, you'll never again talk to a member of the royal family. And I don't think they can really operate in that sort of heavy-handed way. I'd like to see more transparency and accountability, particularly about their finances. People have been calling out for a long time for a royal register. I think there's probably a scope to have some sort of parliamentary inquiry into Andrew as a special representative for trade and what he was up to get the ambassadors to come forward and actually say what was going on. I know this is all water under the bridge, but perhaps if they learn some lessons from that, it will prevent it happening again in the future. I think there needs to be more parliamentary scrutiny of the royal family, and I think also they need to now be included in the freedom of information. They cannot no longer be exempt from examination under FOI.
Yes, and it's been fascinating to read through everything. And was there something in particular that you were surprised by or that you didn't realize was happening at the time?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, I didn't realize how brazen the whole thing was. That Andrew was shoehorning meetings in his schedule as a trade representative for the country for his mates. that he was bringing his mates and indeed his daughters along on these trips, that he was setting up separate business opportunities in hotels when he was meant to be promoting British trade, that he was actually taking commission on deals that had nothing to do with Britain. I mean, he almost, it didn't come through, but he could have got £3.85 million for a commission for a Greek water company in Kazakhstan, organized by a Swiss finance house. Nothing to do with promoting British interests. So, and people just seem to turn a blind eye to this. There's been attempts to try and suppress this book, so the obstacles were put in my way. Not only did they refuse to talk to me, but the Foreign Office told their ambassadors not to talk to me. All the FOI requests I made for his files as special trade representative, none of them have been released, though they should be there under the Public Record Act. I mean, you could go on. I know that when complaints were made to Buckingham Palace, or indeed Number 10 days against the appointment in 2001, he knew what was going to happen. And even he seems to have been overruled.
Yeah, because as I was reading through, it's like I couldn't help but wonder. I was like, what was Buckingham Palace doing? I mean, the Queen had to be somewhat aware of these shenanigans going on. And yet we have that, nothing was done with Andrew, that he was just allowed to go on as if nothing was going wrong, that everything was perfectly fine, that this was all above board. So do you think the Queen in some ways had her head buried in the sand on this issue? Was she not informed? Or was it just that they're like, well, there's nothing we can do?
Yes, she had a blind spot for her son. Well, there were lots of things they could have done. I mean, they could have stopped him being a trade representative almost immediately, which would save some problems. They could have given him proper supervision. They could have investigated his finances and who he was contacting. No, the Queen had a blind spot for her favorite son. It was very difficult for anyone to get through to her. Someone joked that she'd been bailing out Andrew all her life, and she was happy that someone else, like the president of Kazakhstan, had taken over. So it's just one of those things. I mean, we won't know, but it does sully the reputation of the Queen, who was widely respected, and we all thought put the monarchy ahead of her own family interests. But this seems to have been her Achilles heel.
Yes, because she has done so many great things. And there have been times where she has put a stop to things. But in Andrew, he was just indulged.
Yep, indulged as a child. I mean, everyone saw this as an accident waiting to happen. And I'm afraid it just carried on all the way through. And it wasn't helped by being involved with Sarah Ferguson, who had extremely expensive tastes, was always in debt, always had financial problems. And that created pressure on him. That was one of the reasons I think he got drawn into Epstein's ambit. Epstein would pay many of the bills, but there were other reasons. I mean, Epstein gave him contacts that were useful for him. He gave him a jet-set lifestyle. And of course, he gave him access to nubile young women.
Yeah, when it came to the relationship between, obviously, I didn't realize Sarah knew kind of Jeffrey Epstein very well. And I was sort of interested to see that when it came to this dynamic that they had, that Sarah was trying to steer Andrew away from Epstein at some point, like after the arrest and everything. And why did Andrew stay? Was it, obviously the money and the connection to women or girls, really, in the case of Epstein, is just that dynamic just kept going.
Yeah, I mean, I think, he was addicted to that life. I mean, he's a sex addict. He is very keen on money. And to sustain his lifestyle and indeed his ex-wife, he kind of had to keep in that ambit. I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, Sarah Ferguson was keen to distance him from Epstein, and she didn't like the influence that Ghislaine had on Andrew. But she actually had more numbers in the Little Black Book than Andrew. She had 18. She was often staying at the homes in New York and even went down to Palm Beach. And she continued to stay at Epstein's flats after 2010, when she supposedly broke contact. So I think she was pretty happy to remain in the ambit as well, contrary to what her public statements say.
Yeah, it was really interesting reading, especially during the early times of the York's marriage and even afterwards, because obviously, Sarah and Andrew's marriage was a little bit before my time. I was very, very young. And so I was sort of very intrigued by you could see some of the similarities between the dynamics in some ways between obviously the York side and the Sussex side as well. And so I don't know how aware you are of that, but was that something that stuck out to you as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a book on the Duke of Windsor, and again, there are various parallels between Harry and the Duke of Windsor. I mean, there does seem to be a trope running through the royal family. But yes, of course, I mean, it's the weak men and the very strong, ambitious woman outsiders. Clearly they both had military careers. They both, like Harry, wanted to be sort of half in, half out. So yes, of course, there are lots of parallels. And there was an interesting piece in the Telegraph this week saying we need to deal with the two problem princes, Harry and Andrew. And their solution, they were testing the waters, I think, is that they need to lose basically all their titles and be totally cut off, because they are causing reputational damage to the monarchy itself.
Yes, one of the things I've advocated for a long time when it comes to Harry and Meghan and Andrew is this sort of stripping of the titles, places in the line of succession. Because one of the interesting things that came out about Meghan Markle's bullying allegations is that there was no way to discipline really a principal. There was no way to discipline a royal as if you would in a business place. And so, is that going to be something that should be seriously explored by the royal families? Not only how to strip members now, but how to, in the future, set up guideposts. So it's like, if you decide to be a working royal, then not, there's consequences to that. If you decide to step out and damage our reputation, there are consequences to that. Because at this point, I mean, everything they've done is sort of ceremonial. Everybody still technically has their HRH and those sorts of things. So I think it gives the incentive in the future. Is this something the royal family needs to figure out how to deal with now?
Well, I mean, these are the two problem princes, actually, and Harry is no longer, they're no longer working royals. I mean, they're sort of been cut out. I mean, there's actually no problem with the rest of the royal family. I mean, they all do a splendid job. They're highly respected. I can't see actually, and I think maybe the informal system they've got is fine. I mean, everyone I've talked to, speaks very highly of how Princess Anne, Edward, Charles, Sophie, they all treat staff very well. I mean, it's all a very coherent team working together. The two oddbods are Harry and Andrew, and so in some ways this is all just looking back. I suspect that maybe things will be put in place, but I'm not sure they need to now, as long as they deal with these two problems. Andrew still, there are embarrassing disclosures, constantly coming out. We just don't know when the next legal case may have something, or a witness may suddenly come forward. And so I don't know what they do with him. I mean, he's not going to change his spots. I mean, I don't think he's going to go through any form of absolution and go for penance in a monastery. He's just going to carry on as he is, age 65, retired, sitting in Royal Lodge, watching TV, going riding, going for the occasional walk, and dealing with his investments. But I do think that there needs to be some form of royal register, so we know exactly what they're doing, and they're not taking advantage of their royal status in order to make personal profits to others.
100%. And when it comes to Beatrice and Eugenie, I was really excited to hear where you were going to talk about them a bit more, because they seem to have, despite sort of, especially when it comes to Sarah, sort of wild instability, dragging them all over the world at times, that they've turned out seemingly as well as they have is kind of amazing. But at the same time, there are some dealings that they have, especially in the Middle East, through their father's connections. And with, obviously, Catherine having been ill last year, the king having cancer as well. Is there a place for them in the future of the working fold? Because it'll take a while for the Wales's kids to come of age and join that working royal force.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly a big push by the PR team of both Eugenie and Beatrice to have some sort of role. It's something that their father has been pushing for a long time. He talks about them as being princesses of the blood. He's transferred his own ambitions to his daughters. But I would just be very careful, because, as you say, there are some pretty unsavory connections in the Middle East. There is scope for future embarrassment. They are, so given their upbringing, extraordinarily balanced, and they seem very nice, polite children or women. They've clearly got their own careers, their own families. But I would caution about bringing them in, because, I think that there could be some embarrassment there in the future. But my feeling is it is a very slimmed down monarchy. There are pressures on them, but in some ways we've got to accept that they can't be spread, everywhere, and we just have to accept that there will be less royal engagement in things like charities. They won't be able to open lots of things that perhaps deputy lieutenants do now. I think our expectations are very high, and it creates a great deal of pressure on them. There clearly is a big campaign to get them some sort of role. I'm not sure that they're that popular. I think that's again one of the problems. I mean, the Zara and Peter Phillips seem to be popular. Sophie and Edward's daughter particularly seems to be very popular, and they were certainly pushing her. But I personally would have some reservations about the York children, given what I know. And a lot of the stuff I didn't put in the book, I felt that you can't inflict the sins of the parents on the children. But there is growing scrutiny of what they're doing in the Middle East at the moment. So yes, I mean, it's an interesting thing. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And it all depends when William comes to the throne. If, as we hope, King Charles, lasts many more years, then it will be slightly easier, and Georgian people may be in a better position to take up some of the slack. We're already seeing, I think, a sort of dual monarchy. William has clearly been consulted, and is very much the thinking is what does William want for the future, and a sense that we need to clear the decks before he comes to the throne. So there's clearly a lot of preparation going on the basis that it may be sooner than people would like and expect.
Yes, and when it comes to William being king, obviously so many people think that he will be the one to sort of go down the path of sort of addressing these issues, especially with the titles. Have you heard within your research that that's probably going to be the case? There's been so many talks about William really being the one to finally bring the hammer down, sort of, you could say, on the sort of rogue royals.
Well, I think a lot of pressure is put on. Sorry to interrupt. I think a lot of pressure is put on William. I mean, people see him as clearly, they highly respect him. They think he's going to do a good job. He's very pragmatic about it. I think he gets that balance between informality and dignity absolutely right. They have the common touch. They have a very strong sense of public duty, and they are deservedly, both William and Catherine, very popular. But I think it's very hard on him. He's got a young family still. He has a wife who is not fully recovered. And, in some ways, I think some of the stables need to be cleaned out by the present king to give him much more of a clean slate when he comes to the throne. I think it's very hard to pass the thing on down the line and expect him to sort it out. But I do know that he's been very vociferous against Andrew. I mean, he thinks the optics are terrible, that Andrew still lives in Royal Lodge. He's embarrassed at the way that Andrew and Sarah Ferguson have let down the monarchy by their behavior. And I'm sure he is, behind the scenes, putting a lot of pressure on the king, but it has to come from the king.
I agree. And when it comes to Andrew, obviously the big question is, are there pictures, videos out there that will put him even further in disgrace with his involvement in Epstein? And do you think they're out there, and will they surface now, later, sometime in the future?
Well, I think there certainly are pictures there. We know that from what Virginia Giuffre has said. We know it from what Mark Duggan has said, who actually picked up some of the material the FBI picked up. We know it from, I have a man called Tim Riley who talks about the compromat the Russians have. So it's there. There must be a lot of stuff around. I talked to a Kazakh businessman who said that it would be absolutely standard if Andrew was seeing women, that he would be filmed. And I know that women were brought to him in Kazakhstan. So, there is compromat on him by lots of people. No one has produced it yet. And one wonders what they're waiting for, or what the deal has been done to prevent it being released. But it must always be a sword hanging over Andrew, that this stuff could emerge, like a sex tape suddenly put on the internet. So it must be a worry. And, in some ways, the genie is out of the bottle. Lots of people have compromising material, not just film of him in his sexual situations, but I suspect material that he has passed on, perhaps inadvertently, that could be embarrassing if it was revealed that he had passed this material on. And of course, we've had Teng Bo, the alleged Chinese spy, very close to him. I name a Russian agent who I understand seduced him at a Knightsbridge hotel. But who knows who else has got close to him that we don't know about. He was very close to all sorts of figures in China, particularly the Chinese ambassador in London. So, you don't need to be a spy to have picked up information from Andrew. And he would have had information as a trade envoy from his time serving in the Ministry of Defense, and stuff that he would have picked up generally in the course of life and the people he was mixing, not least with Epstein. So it must be a real concern. What has he got that could, if it came out, prove to be very damaging?
Yes, because you would think as well that Andrew would have some sort of awareness, but of course, it's detailed in the book that he's not all that bright, that he was putting himself constantly in compromised situations.
Yes, I mean, very naive. I mean, not well advised. But I think the problem is that the people who do speak truth to him don't tend to last very long. And so he just takes, advice from people who don't, I think, operate as independently as they should. I mean, a number of, highly respected communications people worked for him. And, for example, advised him against the Newsnight interview. And the one person who really pushed it, Amanda Thirsk, his private secretary, but everyone else said, don't do it. And if you are going to do it, prescribe the limits, keep it short, and prepare yourself. And he didn't do any of those things. Basic first lessons in damage limitation and reputation management.
Yes. And when it comes to Andrew's financial impropriety overall, obviously it has not been fully explored. We don't know all the details yet of maybe what he secured or didn't secure through his time. And you sort of mentioned in the very end that maybe if this all comes to light, that it could be the end of the monarchy. And if you kind of add in the Harry and Meghan stuff, I think there definitely could be a case where seeing the abuse of a royal who's supposed to be doing taxpayers' work instead just out there to enrich themselves really puts the monarchy in a bad light.
Yeah, I mean, the monarchy is survived over 1,000 years. They've weathered a lot of storms, including an abdication and the king's own marital problems. And it would need a government to bring in some sort of referendum, and I can't see that happening, even from a Labour government, and certainly not from Reform or Conservative. But it's very clear from the comments in the articles this week that there's a growing Republican feeling in this country. There's certainly, from people like me, and I'm a monarchist, increasing concern and disappointment about the way the royal family work, and that if it's operate and if they are to survive and they are to command widespread trust and respect, then they need to kind of change things. There have been articles in the Sunday Times and programs on Channel 4 looking at royal finances. I think both the Duchy of Lancaster and of Cornwall, the finances there are very opaque. I think people feel that they should be paying income tax. They shouldn't be putting things offshore. There should be much more openness about their wealth. I think William has got the message. I mean, he lives in many ways quite modestly. And sets in some ways a good example, a much more European model. But unfortunately, people like Andrew, don't see the importance of doing that. And I think it must be very frustrating, that William's and is doing his best to sort of create a much more modern monarchy, and he's got these sort of dinosaurs like Andrew who still love all the perks of the past.
It is very true because the European model, I think, because they haven't had such long reigns as Queen Elizabeth in some ways, have been able to adjust a bit better to the changing of the times, you could say.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. She was a product of the 1920s. And, though she did adapt, I mean, we see it, for example, after Diana's death. I mean, she realized what needed to be done. I mean, she was quite a pragmatic woman. Her attitudes were fixed, certainly in the 1940s and 50s. And I think there was frustration that she wasn't going to reform as much as people would have liked and evolve. The king himself is born in the 1940s. I mean, he is not a young man. And I think he, again, has quite traditional views about the monarchy. So I think everyone's placing their hopes in William, to be a modern monarch with a slightly different emphasis. And I think it is very interesting that William and Charles are operating, it seems to be, quite closely together, which is great because, of course, we always had these separate little fiefdoms, often briefing against each other and competing against each other. And if they are working together with a common aim, that can only be good for the monarchy and its future.
It's very true because I think the Brits, because I watch all European royals, and the Brits have been a bit slower to adapt, but I think they'll definitely get there. And I think William is going to be the kind of the shining light of that. But I did want to ask you a question because I noticed throughout the book you use Sarah Ferguson instead of the Duchess of York. And can you share with me the reasoning behind that decision? Because I thought that was really interesting because I obviously still use Meghan Markle and not the Duchess of Sussex.
Well, I didn't actually put Sarah Ferguson in the book. I didn't describe her as Sarah Ferguson. I tried to find as many ways as I could describing her as the Duchess of York. because she isn't Sarah Ferguson, but she's popularly, and I didn't want to use the word Fergie either, which seemed very familiar. And it was getting harder and harder because, of course, there were lots of references to her. And actually, when they edited the book, they stuck in lots of Sarah Fergusons and Fergies. And of course, it makes it much more, I think, accessible, because that's how we know her and describe her. And I think in many ways how she describes herself. So, she can, of course, stand in ceremony, and she makes a lot of the fact that she is a duchess. Which is extraordinary, given that she hasn't been married to him for 30 years. But, of course, Duchess is her calling card, and it's exactly like Meghan. Meghan is kind of rewriting the rule book in terms of the titles she's using. It's how I've always thought of her as Sarah Ferguson, and I think probably most listeners and readers. But I'm interested to know your views about where the monarchy should be going and how it's likely to change, and if this is maybe a seminal point, or they're just all going to shrug their shoulders and hope the problem goes away.
No, it is a very interesting question, because we've had a lot of other scandals in royal families. I don't know if you're familiar with the case in Norway. The crown princess's son is now potentially going to face 23 criminal charges. Some of them incurred at his family's home with his stepfather, who is the crown prince. We have the changes of monarchy in Spain and Belgium because of scandals. So I think when it comes to the future of the monarchy, these sort of improprieties should be taken very seriously, because it doesn't take long for it potentially to undermine the entire operation. And you see, especially Spain, because there's been so much controversy around the former King Juan Carlos, that you feel like Felipe, the current king, he's working so much harder just to try to make sure the monarchy survives every day. And the Spanish, I think, work probably more than just about anybody else. They work in their summer. Most of them take time off. So it's been very interesting to see how all these scandals do result in abdication. Like, they're sort of forced to. This is the only route forward. And so Norway is going to be a very interesting case, though, because it's the next generation. You can't get rid of the king in this instance. Everybody likes the king. It's the next generation. But I think because Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's very interesting, because King Juan Carlos was actually operating with Andrew in Kazakhstan. So actually, a lot of things that King Juan Carlos, and interviewed his mistress, Karina, very similar playbook to what was happening with Andrew. But of course, Andrew isn't the king, fortunately. So in some ways, it is easier for the British to kind of cut him loose. It would be much more worrying if the things I'm writing about were happening, closer to the throne. But yeah, I think it's very interesting to watch, what's happening. And I think Spain is a very good example. But as you say, Norway, rather frightening, actually, what's happening there. Because, it is always this, and this is what I suppose is interesting about writing about royal families, is, you've got to keep remembering it's an institution, but it's also a family with all the family dynamics and tensions, and you're dealing with human frailty. It's not some just big giant corporation. So it's fascinating times.
It really is. I'm really want to do more sort of deep dives, especially on the Norway case. Again, I've been following that fairly closely, but it's been, because it was so modern for a single mom to marry a future king. But obviously you can see where that can be a wonderful thing and then also go terribly sideways.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I suppose they would argue the old days where they married, amongst the aristocracy or the royalty, or they took mistresses and no one sort of seemed too worried. You can see why people are maybe sort of thinking that's a better operation. But to be honest, I don't worry about people's private lives. I think it's when they use their position, their public position, in a corrupted way to make money. I think that's for themselves.
Yes, I agree. Because
that's
obviously
the bigger question. And though the book has had lots of headlines about different elements, so I feel it's about the finances. It's that seems to be where the focus should be. The rest is titillating, and people love gossip, but the real scandal is the way that he's been able to maximize his royal position for private gain.
Yes, and I feel like that is definitely something that's gone through all the headlines I've seen sort of under the radar. It's, a little bit about the spat between Harry and Andrew. While that, like you said, is titillating, it's not really the bigger issue, which is this financial impropriety, which, we see throughout a lot of other royal families as well. because they have a title, because in some cases they've been born a prince or princess of that country, they want to start a business. Well, then are they trading off the titles? Are they doing it correctly? Are they, what are the financial optics involved, because it can reflect badly on the kings and queens, or holidays. The Dutch are getting a lot of flack for having a Greek holiday home. And so it's just been very fascinating to see all these families and the struggles that they've had kind of trying to navigate sort of this modern era, because some of them do it well and some of them not so much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking of Lord Lindley, who's chairman of Christie's, who set up his own woodwork business. Clearly a very skilled craftsman and businessman, and you don't hear any scandal about him. No sorts of impropriety. He seems to have managed it very well, I think. And there are other members of the royal family who have their own careers. Serving the armed forces clearly is an easy one, but also have business careers. And there has never been a hint of scandal about them. I think the ones that are slightly sort of in the middle are Zara and Peter Phillips, who clearly, have, Zara particularly had a distinguished sporting career, and you can see how clearly she's endorsed as a sporting figure as much as the royal figure. But Peter Phillips, I think there have been certain scandals there, promoting milk, very involved with this man Johnny Hon in Hong Kong, who also was busy paying a lot of Sarah Ferguson's bills. So I think this is where the Royal Register comes in. I mean, it only depends on trust and them declaring what they're up to, but I think it would reassure people that they're at least operating, trying to operate above board rather than trying to disguise their business activities.
Mm. And so when you say Royal Register, what are you envisioning for that?
Well, I think a bit like a parliamentary register. Otherwise, you would have to have blind trusts in the way that clearly people who go into government pass it to an independent, all their investments to a private individual. But I think, we should be seeing, who is paying the money for what. If they are endorsing, ocean spray, cranberry juice or whatever, on what basis are they doing that? If they have set up a company with the title Duchess in it, should they be allowed to do that? One of the ways that Sarah Ferguson operated was to say, well, part of it's going to charity, but it was never very clear what was going to charity and if it continued to go to charity. And there were a lot of deals, for example, where the frontlist deal, for example, for a film, the auction monies were going to charity, but what we call the back end, or in effect the royalties, were going to her. And so, if you had a royal register, you would have to make it very clear. We'd have to see the contract, and then there would be some proper transparency, and not this desire to evade any form of scrutiny.
I think that is so incredibly important for the future, for sure. If the monarchy wants to survive, it has to adapt, and that takes some time, but I think it's definitely happening. And so as we sort of wind down here, I do have a couple of questions from members of the channel. And so Angelique asks, many critics have said William will remove Andrew from Royal Lodge once he's king, since King Charles failed. What recourse will maybe William have, or maybe even Charles, if he can do it, oust Andrew from Royal Lodge? Obviously, he has a rent that goes on for 100 years or something like that. But is it possible to get Andrew out?
No, it isn't. I think that's that's why I was amazed that Charles even bothered trying, because it made Andrew look like the victim, and it made Charles look like a bully. He's got a lease, which it was a slightly unusual arrangement, because this is Crown Estate property that was not made available to others, but on grounds of security it was offered to him. He has paid for the upkeep up till now and restored it. He is paying the rent, and so the terms of the lease can't be changed, and I think it's his last form of status. It's the last thing that in some ways he's clinging on to in terms of being a royal. I think he's very keen to pass it on to one of his daughters. He's been living there for a long time. It suits him, as you can imagine. So, though the optics look terrible, unless he can be persuaded to move, because he realizes it's damaging to the image of the monarchy, he's going to stay there. And all the information that I'm receiving is that he's absolutely stubbornly, obstinately insisting that he stays.
Yeah, it seems like he does not want to move. And then we have Chris, who asks, after the revelations of the book, what do you think about the course of action King Charles should take when it comes to Andrew? and sort of Sarah by extension.
Yeah, well, I suspect we'll see less of them at public functions. I don't think they'll be going to Sandringham for Christmas and being allowed to walk to church. But, you know, the feeling may be that let's see what happens, how people react to this. This is just a summer book. We can be able to get back to normal. And, you know, we mustn't react too quickly. So who knows? I think they're going to watch and wait and see what public opinion is. And if there's very strong sense after this that something needs to happen, they will make some concessions. It may not be sufficient. You know, I think they need to kind of get ahead of the narrative rather than respond to it. But who knows what the thinking is? You know, they may discredit me and this book is all made up and wild allegations and they're all terribly old. And he's just a bitter Republican. And nothing to see here. Who knows?
Yeah, and I did have somebody ask as well, because I haven't heard that. So this is Scott Shaw. Ron says, how do you feel about people canceling interviews after Harry got involved with the lawyer's letter? Does it make you question yourself on bringing this all to the forefront with the Yorks and in turn the Sussexes?
Well, I mean, Harry is a paragraph in the book. I never thought there would be any problem about that. It went through our legal, we didn't even give it a second thought, and it's clearly not damaging. I mean, in some ways, it does some credit to Harry the way he behaved. But yes, you're absolutely right. You know, quite a lot of things have been cancelled in the States. I mean, he has been writing round threatening in media organizations. I think it's very worrying if they have responded to that, but they have. You know, because we have First Amendment rights, we have freedom of speech. I thought even under Trump. It's an attempt for him to intimidate. He does this a lot. I mean, he is highly litigious. It'll be interesting to see if he follows through with it. No one thinks, from certainly my legal team, that he will. But I'm perfectly prepared to fight the case, to depose him, and to produce all the information I have, which I think would be pretty embarrassing to him. So bring it on, I say. Very happy to have a fight.
Oh, that is
and
awesome
he's given me publicity which has more than compensated for the people cancelled. So, but you know, I don't think it reflects very well on those people who have cancelled, that they have bowed so easily to these legal threats. But he does employ, you know, some very aggressive lawyers in the belief that back to entitled, he can do what he wants.
Yes, you could definitely use that title for a Harry and Meghan book as well, because honestly, yeah, you know, looking through the book, you know, it's only the paragraph, like, you know, a page or two technically. And it's like, there's just really nothing that we haven't really heard before. And so it's like, why does he even react? But he always overreacts to pretty much everything. And so Trina asks, how have Princess Beatrice and Eugenie really separated themselves from the scandals of their parents? Because they've done a fairly good job of keeping the chaos of their parents at a distance to a certain extent.
Well, I mean, there's a big piece in the Daily Mail today about, you know, their response and how they have distanced themselves from their father, not so much from their mother. I mean, they describe themselves as the tripod. I mean, it's a very close relationship there. It seems to be less close with Andrew. I know that, you know, what I thought was very interesting is at Christmas when Andrew and Sarah were having to stay at Royal Lodge and not go to Sandringham, that one of the daughters went to Sandringham in preference to actually going to Royal Lodge. And I think if I didn't have my parents, I would have decided to leave the large family gathering to go and support my parents for Christmas. So I thought that was quite revealing. You know, they have their independent lives. They've got their own families and careers. Eugenie spends a lot of time abroad. I mean, Beatrice travels quite a bit. So in some ways, it's easier now to distance themselves. I think they're clearly worried about the reputational damage to them because of their father. So they're torn. I'm sure they have loyalty and love for their father, but I think they can see that certainly publicly, they need to be very careful about their association. Sarah Ferguson's got a lot of support by being loyal to Andrew, and he was very loyal to her when she was very unpopular and causing him a lot of embarrassment. We, of course, remember the 2010 sting where she was, for £500,000, offering to sell access to Andrew. So, you know, they've watched each other backs over the years, and I think that's going to continue. But I think the children, you know, have to have their own separate lives, and I suspect we will see slightly more distancing from certainly the father.
Yes, and I thought it's almost, you could say, nice that Andrew and Sarah support each other as well as they do, to be quite honest. Even though obviously they've done terrible things and have been engaged with terrible people, at the same time, they always have each other's backs. And so that's kind of nice to see a divorced couple go that way. But just to wind up here, last question, JGH6012 asks, who is financially supporting Andrew now that the Queen has passed? How is he? I mean, obviously he has shady deals going on potentially anywhere. So how is he generating money at this point, or is he?
Yes, I think he has plenty of money, and this is why I'm always amazed when people say he's got no money and he's having to do these dodgy deals. I mean, there's trust money that Kelly gets passed on, probably from the Queen Mother. I think the Queen would have made sure he was okay, knowing his situation. His Royal Naval pension is actually much higher than has been quoted. There's always quote a figure from sort of 30 years ago, and that will have gone up. His wife still makes a lot of, ex-wife still makes a lot of money. She has rental income from flats. Whether that rental income goes to her or the daughters is unclear. But we know, he was taking large sums of money out of Pitchett Palace Global that he was transferring to some of his bank accounts or his other companies. And from the brief glimpses we've got of some of these legal cases, there's some large sums of money coming in. There's a famous Selman Turk case from 2022, where £750,000 was paid to him by Mrs. Isbelin, another 250,000 or 350,000, 250,000 was paid by Selman Turk to Sarah Ferguson, which she wasn't able to properly explain. She said it was for being a brand ambassador for some solar energy firm. There was 25,000 to Eugenie from someone that she didn't even know. So, that's when we have court cases. I mean, how many more episodes are there that haven't hit the media? And this is slightly worrying. So worrying for the public in terms of transparency, not so worrying for them, because I suspect there is plenty of money coming in. We just don't know about it. And, there was lots of business going on in China with Tenbo, with money paid into a Chinese bank account. So, is he just drawing from the Chinese bank account?
All very interesting questions that we may or may not get the answers to, but it was a really fascinating book, Andrew. I enjoyed learning a lot more about Sarah and Andrew and all sort of the chaos that they bring to the world and the royal fold. So is there anything else you want to share as we wrap up?
No, it's great. No, I'm delighted for us to finally talk. I'm doing an update on the book, so if some of your listeners and viewers have little anecdotes or experiences or anything they would like to contribute, I mean, that's what I'm relying on for this update. New information from people who've come across them or heard stories about them. So I'm sure you've got a very well-informed audience. They, I'm sure, will have thoughts. Always interested to hear from people with some of the issues that we've talked about, what they feel about the future of the monarchy and where they should be going.
Yeah, it's always an interesting discussion because I'm very much in favor of monarchies, but at the same time, there are definitely issues there as well. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully maybe we'll talk again soon, because I did start reading Trader King and I haven't finished it, but I'd love to chat with you about that one as well.
Well, I look forward to that. Okay. That would be lovely.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Let me know what you thought. And don't forget to pick up Andrew's book entitled, which will be out August 14th. And obviously, Andrew wants to get your thoughts as well, so feel free to let him know what you thought, either of the book or any interactions that you've had with the Yorks. I think he would be very interested to hear. Guys, thank you so much for listening, and I shall talk to you again very soon. Bye.